One of the biggest strengths of flat knitting is the ability to knit panels for garments. This unit, we will discuss about the unique ability of a flat knitting machine to knit ready to assemble panels. We will also examine the advantages of such a technique. By the end of this unit, students will be able to describe what is fashioning, list the advantages of using these techniques. In case of a woven fabric or a circular knitted fabric, the process of converting the fabric into garments are as follows. Spread the fabric on the cutting table, draw the technical patterns of the garment on the top layer of the fabric, cut it with a manual or automated cutting system, then assemble panels to create the garment using appropriate stitching and finishing machines. As we discussed earlier, the moment we cut a knitted fabric, that area must be finished in order to prevent the fabric from unraveling. So we end up using mostly flat lock stitches at the hemline and overlock stitches on the seams. Unlike circular knits or woven fabric, in flat knitting, we can straight away knit the required panels with the required measurements. Let me explain this little more. Suppose we have to make a t-shirt, one in circular knitted fabric and another one with flat knitting. Since the circular knitting is going to produce a tubular fabric, one need to first cut open the side of the tube to make it open with fabric. Next, the technical pattern has to be traced to the fabric and 4 panels have to be cut out of it. One for the front side of the t-shirt, one for the back and 2 for 2 sleeves. Since the side of all panels have to be cut, one has to use either flat lock or overlock to finish the edges. So, the shoulder, side and armhole would be finished with overlock machine and hem of the body and sleeve would be finished with flat lock. A rib would be attached to the neck with overlock. If the same t-shirt is to be produced out of a flat knitting machine, all 4 panels will be knitted separately. Let's look at how to knit the front panel. First, take the maximum width of the panel from the technical pattern. It would be the chest measurement. Let's assume that the chest and bottom measurements are around 20 inches and the shoulder measurement is about 15 inches. We will set the needle bed to knit 20 inches plus 3 veils on either side as the seam allowance, which will go inside the seam while stitching. We usually start knitting with a rib at the hem area for better stability, and once we knit around 1 inch of 1 by 1 or 2 by 2 rib, we will convert the double bed knitting to a single bed knitting by transferring loops from back bed to front bed. Continue knitting till we reach the maximum length of the panel, around 6 to 10 courses to be knitted extra before knitting stopped. Now the bottom of the panel is already finished with a rib and the side of the panel is also finished with the required measurements. But still we need to cut the armhole area, shoulder slope, neck before attaching this panel with the sleeves and the back panels. Same way, we need to knit the back panel and 2 sleeves. Cut and sew it with overlock machine to finish the garment. Apart from knitting the desired width on flat knitting machine, you can also increase loops on either side or decrease loops on either side to do narrowing or widening. Using this technique, you can also shape a panel to match it to the exact measurement and shape of technical pattern. The shaping of knitted panel while knitting is popularly known as fashioning, and fashioning opens up a completely different set of possibilities in apparel design as well as manufacturing. We have seen knitting, how knitting is done in various ways, and we have seen how the fabric is being manufactured. We have seen how designs can be incorporated into knitted fabric. Now, how are we going to do garment using flat knitting? Now, before getting into the flat knitted garments, let's start with what we already know. In woven fabrics or in circular knitted fabrics, the garment making method is as follows. First, they are going to spread the fabric on a table. Then there will be, if this is a t-shirt design, if such kind of garments t-shirt to be made, there will be patterns made for the front panel which runs like this. There will be a back panel which runs like this, and there will be two sleeve panels, and there will be a pattern for the rib. So, a total 5 different patterns would be traced on to the long fabric. So, it might look like this, the front pattern, like that, back pattern, sleeve patterns and the rib pattern would be copied to the fabric, and we call that as marker planning. Now, in a marker planning, we will try to keep all the panels very close to each other so that no wastages, or we can reduce the wastage. Now, after creating this marker plan, we are going to cut the patterns. We have to keep the patterns very closely, and after that we are going to cut the panels all around. So, it is a knitted fabric, we are going to cut the panel from this bigger longer fabric. That means we are going to cut all this area. After that, we will be start assembling these panels together to make a garment. So, for example, when we cut any knitted fabric, we have discussed earlier, the moment we cut a fabric that is going to be highly unstable, that means we need to finish the seam. So, we have all the 5 panels ready. For time being, we will not include the rib panel. We will talk only about the body part. So, the rib is removed. Let us say the rib is not available, not there. So, first front panel and the back panel we will assemble at the shoulder using probably overlock machine. Then this sleeve would be attached using overlock machine both side. After that, the side would be finished using overlock machine. The neck would be finished with the rib, again overlock machine, and the arm hole opening or the sleeve opening, the hem opening would be finished with flat lock. The same way in the bottom hem also going to be finished, folded and finished with flat lock machine. So, that means since we are cutting this panel all around, all the areas have to be finished using one of the machines. Now, if we have different sizes, again the same fabric we are going to place different patterns and cut the panels out of it and assemble it. And this is how it is done in woven garments as well as circular knitted garments. Now, when it comes to flat knitted garments, first of all, we do not have the concept of fabric. We do not make long big fabrics. What we make is the panels straight away out of the knitting machine. So, that means if we have one t-shirt like this to be produced using a flat knitting technique, just would like to add here, though we have mentioned like flat knitting is industries producing sweaters, but then it can also produce t-shirts, and these days summer wears are produced using finer flat knitting machines. So, let us say we are going to produce the same t-shirt using a flat knitting machine. The difference here would be, instead of making a big fabric and then place the pattern, mark it and then cut this out, This panels would be produced directly from the flat knitting machine. So, we will be making one panel suitable for the front, another panel suitable for the back, a third and fourth panel suitable for the sleeve, and rib we are not discussing it. So, let us say there are 4 panels to be produced. So, individual panels would be produced using the machine. If we have a different size, different panels would be produced using this machine. Now, in flat knitting machine, the biggest advantage is, if there is a needle bed, if there are like 1 to 500 needles in it, we can knit any number of needles any point of time. So, if we want to knit only say 20 needles, we can have a fabric width of 20 bales and produce whatever length you want. If you want 200 needle fabric width, that also can be produced. So, using this technique, we can have whatever is the maximum width of the garment, the same panels can be produced in the same machine. Whereas in circular knitting industry, the moment you change the size of this fabric, if you want to change it for whatever reason, you need to go for a completely new machine. In circular knitting, since it is getting knitted in a circular manner, there is no way we can increase or decrease the number of needles used there unless you change the machine itself. Whereas in flat knitting industry, it is highly flexible. On this flat knitting machine, you can knit just 2 to 3 needles or the entire needle bed. In between, let us say we started with 200 needles, you want to increase that into 300 needles in between, that is possible. You want to, from 300 you want to reduce it to say 150 or 100 or 50, whatever numbers you want, both are possible. We will come to that little later. So, for time being, we are concentrating on the difference between the fundamental difference between the making of garments using flat knitting machines and circular knitting machines. So, as I said, circular knitting machine, we are going to keep the panels, the patterns, mark it, cut out of a single fabric. That is the biggest difference. We are going to cut this entire panels out of a single fabric, where in flat knitting industry, we are going to make individual panels for different parts of the garment. Also, if there is a different size, again we are going to make individual panels, all from the same machine. Now, when we make this panel separately, the biggest advantage is, like, we always start knitting from bottom to the top. The starting point would be here because we are going to keep on adding cores on top of each other. So, it will start gradually increasing like this. So, the first course whatever we are going to knit would be the bottommost course, and the last course will come to the top. So, when we start knitting, we are finishing that edge there already, it is a self finish, and there is another property with knitted fabric, especially if it is a single jersey fabric, it will curl. So, to avoid that, if it is a single jersey body, we will start with some kind of double jersey fabric. Most commonly used is rib fabrics or a tubular start. So, if it is a rib fabric, we will have a rib structure appearing here. So, rib structure will always pull the fabric inside. So, it will have a slight shape here, and then you can see a rib structure appearing here. So, this one is a self finished or self start fabric. When you start that, the area is already finished, there is no need to fold it or overlock it or flat lock it, because this fabric is starting from here only, we are not cutting it at this area here. Whereas side is also fixed because we know the measurement required, the machine is highly flexible to do whatever number of needles and whatever width you want. So, whatever is the exact width, finished width you want, plus the seam allowance would be added into the machine, and we will be using only that many needles to produce this fabric. Now co- ma- uh, once we make this fabric completely like this, later on we have to cut this armhole out, both armholes, shoulder slopes to be cut out, and the neckline to be cut out. So I'll draw this once again so that you will understand it better way. So we'll produce a panel which might look like this with a rib. We'll cut this armhole area out, shoulder and the neck. So we'll cut all this area. So here we need to do overlock, here we need to do overlock, here we need to do overlock, here again we need to do overlock. Here we will finish it with a rib using overlock or flat lock or other technique called linking. Now that means in this areas there is no cut, we can straight away link it or we can use overlock also, but here there is no fold, no stitch, nothing happens in this area. So this is how a flat knitted garment is made. Now one fundamental question can be, since if you remember, like we had gauges starting from 2.5, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, like that. I said like this much up to 18 belongs to flat knitting industry, and from here the circular knitting machine starts. So we, if we want to go somewhere here, the difference between a flat knitted fabric and a circular knitted fabric will not be that much. So is there any way by looking at the garment we can identify whether it is done using flat knits or circular knits? It will be an interesting question. Now one of the method is look at the size of the loops. Now through experience you will come to know how this 10 gauge will look like, how a 7 gauge will look like. One method which you must be thinking would be like, if there are 7 needles in 1 inch, 4, 5, 6, 7, that many loops you will see in the fabric also. That's what we understood, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, when you look at the fabric, in a 7 gauge fabric, you will actually see more than 7 veils. The reason is, while knitting on machine, the fabric is in a stretched position. The moment you take out the fabric out of the machine, it will shrink. So when you look at, when you count, when you try to measure and count the loops or veils in a fabric and try to come out with the gauge, that may go wrong, because you might find more needles, more veils per inch than the machine had, I mean in terms of needles. So through experience you will get very clearly the answer by looking at, you can clearly say whether it is a 7 gauge fabric, 8 gauge or 10 gauge or 12 gauge. Otherwise if you want to apply any formula, it's difficult, but then if you see, let's say 9 veils, then you can guess probably it is a 6 gauge or a 7 gauge, something like that. So we were discussing about how we can identify or differentiate a t-shirt if it is knitted on flat knits and circular knits. Now when we get the t-shirt, the first thing you need to see is the kind of loops and the size of loops. Now if you feel it is less than 18 gauge, that could be one indication it is out of flat knitting industry. Now as I told you, if it is around this area we can easily identify that. If it is towards finer knits, it will become very difficult for you to really differentiate between, let's say, 16 to 18 gauge and 20 or 22 gauge. It will be confusing. So yes, one method would be definitely the gauge of that fabric, which looks like whether it is 7, 10, 12, 14, whatever gauge. The second method, just to ensure, is look at the hem. So if you remember what we discussed about the method used in circular knitting industry is, the fabric would be cut at the hem. That means we have to fold it and then finish it. So when you fold it, usually the standard method to finish that fabric would be using a flat lock machine. So a flat lock seam will have two parallelly running stitches on the top. Backside you will see a covering stitch, so that will cover the edge of the folded fabric. So if you look at a flat knitted garment, you will not see such kind of folded and flat locked finish. You will see a self start where you will have rib structure or a tubular start. So these are the two methods you can apply to identify whether this particular garment is made out of circular knitting industry or a flat knitting industry. Now we were concentrating on flat knitting industry, and we were discussing about the difference between the way we make garments in flat knitting industry and circular knitting industry. So that we have seen. Now let's imagine a situation where you have four garments which looks identical. The brand is same, the fabric is same, the garment design is same, colors is same, virtually everything looks exactly the same except one difference, that is the price tag of it. Let's say we have four garments which looks, feel exactly the same from the same brand, and still let's say you have 999, 1599, 1999, 2999. Is it possible to have this scenario? You must be thinking the fabric quality would be different. One would be very cheap fabric, another one would be very expensive. No, everything is same. Now everything, when I say the fabric, whatever you see from outside, everything is same, but we still have four different price tag. Now this would be a real scenario because we can produce flat knitted garments in various ways. So using the same fabric, same structure, but when we make the panel, we can have it in different ways. I will explain the first method. The first method is you make a panel of whatever width you want. So let's say the chest measurement, if that is the maximum width, let's say we have 20 inches chest measurement. So we might need quarter inch on both sides as same allowance. So we will make a panel with 20 and half inch width. Then that case we have to cut this areas which I explained earlier. So armhole to be cut out, shoulders to be cut out, the neck area to be cut out. Now if we make a garment this way, it will cost the least, and probably we can sell this particular garment for say 999. So the second method, we will make the fabric up to this, the panel remains same. After that we have armhole shaping here, so we will make the shape while knitting. Well, that is a possibility. I will explain that how it is done little later. Let's concentrate on the price difference and what makes that difference. So now here we have to cut this armhole, shoulder slope, and we also need to cut the neck. Here, since we need to shape the panel while knitting, that will be expensive procedure, so we might need to pay 1599 for such kind of a garment. What is the advantage? Why should we pay more money for that? We'll explain it little later. So third one, if you look at it, the 1999, it might look like this. If when you knit it, it will have complete shape in it. There is absolutely no cutting anywhere. The entire panel would be shaped the way you want while we do the knitting. So when this panel has come out of the machine, front panel, back panel, two sleeve panels, but all we need to do is stitch it together. There is no need to cut. When you don't need to cut, you really don't need to finish the edges also. That is the advantage which I will explain. This we might need to pay 1999 for. Now the difference here is the shaping part alone. Now the fourth one, which cost 2999, would be a garment without any seam. Now that is called seamless garments. Yes, you heard it right. There will not be any seam at all. There will be a garment made without any seam anywhere. So these are the four methods used for making garments in flat knitting. Now I'll explain how it is done before we get into the quality part of it. Now as I told you earlier, in flat knitting you can change the number of needle used any point of time. We can have starting let's say we have around 20 needles or 20 veils, 20 needles to start with. After knitting few courses, it is possible to increase or reduce the needles. That means we are going to change the width of the fabric midway. That is possible. One method is, let's say we have a machine and we have around needle number 1 to 200 needles here, and we wanted a shape which goes straight up, later on increase this for whatever reason. For this purpose, what we need to do is, like, we need to see like how much we need to increase. So let's say here there are 20 required, here 10 required, 10 required later. So we know we cannot start from needle number 1 here, because later on we have to increase few needles towards this side. So for that purpose we will start around, let's say, 15th needle from here. So that means 15 plus 20, 35th needle will be this much we will be using to start our knitting with the 20 needles. Later on we will be increasing 10 needles here and 10 needles here to make this shape. So what all we need to do is, like, after every course when we knit next time, switch on one more needle, knit that needle, and then later on knit on top of this. So this way we can keep on increasing the veils, and we can also increase the width of the fabric. Now this method is called widening. Using this method, we can increase the width of the fabric any point of time while knitting, and if we need to reduce it, that is also possible. Let's say you want to reduce this width of the fabric. So we have knitting going on with this many needles. Now we want to reduce it. to do widening, we don't need to do any other method, any other techniques except pushing the needle into knitting action. That's all we need. But when we reduce the loops, we cannot just leave the needle and or switch off the needle with the loop and then start knitting. That is not possible. If we need to switch off a needle, we have to make that needle free, meaning we have to remove whatever loops are there on that particular needle. We need to remove that. So we have to take out that loop, put it into the adjacent needle so that that needle is empty. Now we can switch off this particular needle. Now remember, we discussed about how transfer can happen and how move can happen. Transfer was from one bed to the other. Move was a movement of a loop sideways in the same bed. So move would be applicable here. We are going to take out this loop from this needle and we are going to either put it towards the right hand side or the left hand side, depending on. Now if you look at, this is the needle, this is the width of the fabric. To reduce the width of the fabric, we have to put this loop inside. So we need to move this from left to right, and here this side we need to move this particular loop from right to left. So this way, if we continue knitting, and again we remove this and put it here, and remove this and put this loop here, we are further reducing the width of this fabric. This way, if we keep on move the loops from the outside needles, put it inside and switch off those needles, if you continue that in few steps, you will get a narrowed fabric. So using these two terminologies, so using these two techniques, widening and narrowing, you can achieve any kind of shape. So let's understand how fully fashioned or fully shaped panels are made. So if you want to make a pattern which looks like this, the first thing we need to do is, like, we need to understand how many veils we need for this width. Now after that, once we, how many courses required to achieve this much, then in this width, how many needles we need to remove to get this shape, and in what course we need to do that needle removing. After that, what is the slope here, this need to be understood. Then finally, what is the width here, veils, and what is the depth, that is in course. So we need to do a calculation and planning before we start knitting. Now as I explained earlier, when we knit the machine, on the machine it will be in a stretched position, the fabric would be in a stretched position. The moment you remove the panel from the machine, it will shrink, it will rather start to shrink. That is because usually if you take out the panel from the machine, it would have already kind of changed its dimension while it was on machine. It would have come down a little bit in terms of width and the height also. Now after that, you leave that fabric for some time, it will start shrinking further. So according to various studies, it will take almost 48 hours to attain full shrinkage. If you calculate before this fabric attain full shrinkage, we will get the calculation wrong, because once we make the garment, leave it for 3-4 days, the garment would have changed its dimension, would have become smaller. So to avoid that, we need to leave it for enough time, attain shrinkage naturally by leaving it aside for 48 hours. Then if you are washing it, it will further create more shrinkage in, whether it is whatever is the material, depending on the material. Cotton would be having one of the highest shrinkage, probably wool or nylon will have little less. Whatever is the material, all the materials are going to have some kind of shrinkage when you wash it. So, how do we get this correct? Because we don't want a situation where we knitted the panel and we measured everything was right, we washed it, finished it, sent to the customer. When the customer measure it, it is very small. That means like while it was in store or while it was washing, all the shrinkage is attained and we didn't consider that shrinkage into our calculation. So, that is a wrong method. So, to avoid such kind of problems, what we are going to do is like, we know this is the garment to be made, we know this is the yarn to be used, we know this is the gauge to be used, and we know the fabric density in terms of the number of veils and number of courses in 1 inch. This is what we need to maintain to make that fabric look firm and nice. What we need to do is same sitting with the same material, same yarn, we have to make one panel. So, we make one panel out of the knitting machine without any shaping and all that, we just make the panel. Let it attain shrinkage by leaving it aside for some time. Wash it nicely in the same washing machine with the same setting or whatever setting you want to do washing. Once that washing shrinkage is attained completely, then take measurement for 10 inches by 10 inches area, then divided it by 10. So, basically you will get in 1 square inch number of veils as well as number of courses. So, once we have this details, the number of veils and number of courses in 1 square inch, that means we have the required material, the required number for our calculation. So, course per inch, veils per inch we will get. Let us say after washing, after attaining complete shrinkage, we have calculated course per inch as let us say 20, veils per inch as 15. I am putting some round figures so that it is easier for us to calculate. You might get even fractions, but then we are supposed to calculate it properly to get maximum accuracy. At the moment, I am just putting some round figures as course would be around 20 per inches, veils per inch, let us say there are 15. What does it mean? When you knit 20 times, we are going to produce 1 inch fabric. Now, height wise, width wise, when we use 15 needles, we are going to get 1 inch. This is the meaning of this calculation. So, once this one is established, the next thing we need to check is what is the length here. So sorry, what is the width here? Let us say it is 20 inches width, 20 inches we need to achieve, and in 1 inch 15 needles to be used. In 1 needle 15 needles, 1 inch 15 needles, that is 15 veils per inch. That means in 20 inches how many needles to be used? So, 20 multiplied by 15, that will be around 300 needles to be used. So, we need 300 needles to start knitting here. So, we need to calculate it this way. So, we are going to write like 300 needles required. Let us say here the width is 1 inch extra. Whatever we had here, there was a slight shape there, so 1 inch extra. So, that means 315 needles would be used up to this level. We got this measurement. Now, we need to see how much is this width, the width of the shoulder. So, let us say around 2 inches has been reduced here, 2 inches has been reduced here. That means we are going to reduce 30 needles here, this way, around 30 needles here, this way also. So, we are going to reduce 300, we are going to start with 300 needle, increase into 315 needle, later on 30 needles would be reduced from this side, 30 needles would be reduced from this side. So, that whatever is the number of needles, we will get it here. So, that will be around 315 minus 30, that will be 285 minus 30 here, so 255 needles would be there on the top. So we got the basic measurements required for to start knitting in width wise. Now what about height wise? We need to calculate that as well. So that means, let's measure this. Let's say this is around 20 inches again height up to this level from the hemline. These are again I am using round figures so that it is easier to calculate, but you have to make the pattern first, you have to measure it, and you have to probably use a calculator to calculate it with accuracy. So that once you do a accurate calculation, when you knit it, wash it, after attain shrinkage, it will fit exactly into the pattern you already made. So let's say 20 inches is the height of this panel from the baseline or hemline to the armhole, the bottom of the armhole level, armpit point. So 20 inches, and in 1 inch we have to have 20 courses. So that means in 20 inches we need to have around 400 course. Is that correct? 2 multiplied by 20 would be 40, and 1 more 0, 400 courses. So we need to knit 400 courses to achieve this height. So when we start knitting, we had 300 needles. Slowly in 400 courses we have to add around 7 needles here, let's say 8 needles this side. So if you want to make it as exactly symmetrical, instead of 315 you can take it as 316 or 314, so that you know precisely 7 plus 7 to be added. Now that means when are we going to add these needles? In 400 courses, 7 needles to be added. Now that means like probably after every 30 courses we can add 1 needle. So you might get around 30 courses, we will keep on adding 1 needle like that, and when you reach 7 just leave it. Or you can do better calculation on this and precisely find out exactly in what number of courses we need to add, one needle each. But when we add needle, we will be adding only 1 needles at a time. So once we add that, by the 400 course we reached around 315 needles or 315 veils we have reached here. Now from here, this point we have to get the shaping. So again we need to calculate it. Now I will explain it after erasing this so that there will be less confusion about this picture. So I simplified the drawing now. We already calculated how many courses and how many veils required. What I have removed is the shoulder slope and the neck part. Once you understand this shaping, we can then add that part also. So now if you look at the pattern, I also made it slightly shorter so that it is easier to accommodate in the given space, otherwise it will look much longer in reality. So what we are doing is, we have 300 needles to start with. We have to increase into 315. Instead of that we will be making into 314, so that we have good number there. So this will be 254. So when we start, we have 300 needles. We are going to add 7 needles this side, 7 needles this side. So it will become 314 total. Now after that we are going to reduce 30 needles from the side, 30 needles from the side, 60 needle total we are going to reduce it. Then we will get the figure of 254 later towards this area. Now that is width wise. So, number of needles we are going to increase is 7 plus 7 here, and by the time we reach here 30 needles would be removed, 30 needles would be removed. That is what we are going to do. Now, this to be achieved in certain number of courses as well, then only we will get the shape exactly the way we want. So, initially 400 course would be knitted, and slowly we will be increasing 7 needles in between while knitting this 400 courses here. Then here there is a shape. So, this part has been explained earlier. So, this particular shape, the shape is, if you look at armhole curve, it will be somewhat like that. Now, in flat knitting industry, there are two ways you do this shape. First of all, in flatbed knitting industry, you make it straight, you don't bring it back like in a woven pattern. In a circular knitted in a flat knitting industry, you usually make it straight, but that is called a J curve, and there is something called L curve. Instead of this shape, you come straight down and give a very sharp angle to it. So, these are the two shapes. This is called L curve, this is called J curve. These are the two shapes used for armhole. Usually, if it is 2.5 gauge, 5 gauge or 7 gauge up to 8 gauge, you can use this shape also, it will not create too much of problem. But if it is finer gauge, then J curve is more preferred. This one is easier to calculate and use it, this one is slightly difficult. So, what we are going to do is, like, we are going to make it as a L curve first. That means this shape would be straight and up. So, what I have divided is, like, how the way I have divided is, like, we had 400 courses here and we had 150 courses from this point to this point. So, 50 courses I have to achieve this shape, 50 courses I need to achieve. So, it might look somewhat like this. Another 100 course would be straight knitting. So, in 50 courses we have to remove 30 needles. So, that is the calculation. So, how are we going to do this particular 150 courses? We need to remove 30 needles. That is what we need to discuss now. So, our target is to remove 30 needles in 50 courses. So, we have 50 courses and 30 needles. Now, another important thing is, when we remove needles, that means we are doing shaping and we are doing narrowing. The way to achieve narrowing is by removing loops from the needle and put it inside. So, that takes lot more time. We have to stop knitting, we have to pick those loops from the needle, we have to shift it and again start knitting. So, if we do one needle at a time, that is going to take too much of time. So, what we can do is, like, we can pick up 2 loops at a time and shift it, so that at a time we can remove 2 needles. This can also be achieved with 3 needles at a time. We can take out 3 needles and then shift it, so that this 3 needles can be switched off simultaneously. Now, I am not doing that, let us do 2 needles at a time. That is also because we are talking about loops being shifted. So, let us imagine we are removing these 2, we have to shift this one here, that means this loop has to be stretched up to this. So, that is getting stretched into almost double the size of a normal loop. So, a normal yarn will withstand this much if it is a good quality yarn, but beyond this, into the third loop sometime it might break. So, the best way to achieve fashioning is not one, it is going to take too much of time, one at a time. 1 needle at a time is going to take too much of time. 3 is going to be a problem because it might break. So, the best midway is, like, you remove 2 needles at a time, do narrowing with 2 pitch or 2 needles. That is the best way to achieve shaping or narrowing. So, we have to remove 30 needles. So, we are going to do 2 needles at a time. That means 15 times we need to do 2 needles, 15 times we will get 30 needles. So, in 50 courses we have to perform this 15 times. So, a little bit of calculation again. What I am going to do is like straight away I will make it as 45 in 45 courses 15 times. Now, that is easy. That means like every third course I have to remove 2 needles. So, if I do every third course, if I remove 2 needles, I can repeat it 15 times, and by 45th course I would have removed all the 30 needles. Now, that is a calculation we are going to apply here. So, what we are going to do is, up to this we have knitted already. So, we have loops created, it is ready here. Now, we are starting from here. We have to remove 2 loops, 2 needles. So, we will take out these 2 loops, put this loop here, this loop we are going to put it here, emptying 2 needles. So, we can switch off those needles, while after that we are going to knit, continue knitting only on these loops. So, we will knit 1, 2 and 3 courses we will knit. After knitting that, the third course we are going to remove, or third course these loops would be again shifted or moved towards inside. So, again we are going to reduce 2. So, we will knit 1, 2 and 3 courses again, and we continue like this. So, that means we are going to get a step kind of shape, but this looks, I mean, we have zoomed it too much. That means like each loop would be of this size. That will never happen. It will be actually like the small steps being created, but then it is not concrete or metal or plastic. It is loops being formed. It is flexible. So, and when the moment you pull this in diagonal direction, it is going to be pulled literally, meaning this would be smoothened out. You will not see a steps or anything, you will see a very clean smooth finish here. So, once we achieve this shape, then we will start knitting continuously, so it will go straight as well. So, we are going to get this shape exactly the way we want it. So, this is what going to be happening. Now, I have explained one side, the same thing will be happening to this side also. It will not be a J curve, it will be a L curve which looks like this. So, once we achieve this, we can say we have shaped the panel according to the requirement. Now, if we need to do shaping for J curve, which is more smoother like this instead of this. This one is easy to do, I have explained that. Now, if you need to do this way, we have to divide it into few areas. One is a straight line. Anyway, we cannot have a very smooth, we need to break this into smaller straight lines again. So, this much area, very steep shaping, then little less steep, then little less more, then straight. So, I am again exaggerated this or zoomed in into this, and I made 1, 2, 3, 4 different parts into, if you want a very smooth curve. If you do not want this much smoothness, we can probably have 1 segment, 2 segment, 3rd segment straight away. Now, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 segments for a better finish here. So, that means this much area I have to close all the loops, and here I need to have very frequent shaping. less frequent, even less frequent, and no shaping at all, it is knitting straight line. So, this is how we are going to achieve such kind of smooth curve. Now, if you notice, like, we can actually remove only 2 needles at a time. So, even if you remove 2 needles in every course, we still cannot achieve a perfect straight horizontal closure. It will happen only in this direction. So, how are we going to achieve this part? Now, to achieve this part, we need to do something called bind off, meaning there are loops here. We are going to put this loop into this, then take this loop out, then put this into this, then take this, put it into this, take this, put it into this. So, we are going to have this loops being done like this. We are locking this in a way, and that is called bind off. We are going to do that for this much area. We will not do any knitting during that time. That meaning we are achieving a horizontal closure of loops using bind off technique. That takes a lot of time, but then if we want to achieve the shaping, we need to do this. That's the reason fully shaped panels are more expensive than armhole shaped panels, and also J curve method would be more expensive compared to L curve method. L curve, there is no this segment, it is only one type of fashioning, very fast we do it, and then straight knitting. This would be less expensive to make compared to the J curve, but then if you want more finishing, more nicer look, clean look, then we need to do this method. So, after this we know we have to achieve 50 courses, again the same shape. So, calculation remains same because we want to achieve basically the same thing. So, out of 50, let us say 30 needles we need to remove. Out of that, let us say 6 needles we are going to remove in this method. So, 0 courses knitted here. So, 50 courses we need to achieve this 30 needles in, 6 needles already removed. Now, we have 24 needles left. Let us say we have removed 10 needles here in the span of, let us say, 10 courses. So, we are going to remove 10 needles in 10 courses. Probably I can use the same color, so it will be easier for you to understand. So, here 6 needles in red color, here 10 needles. So, we have total 30 needles to be removed. Here again we will have 8 needles to be removed. So, 10 plus 8, 18 plus 6, 24, we have 6 more, 6 needles here we are going to remove it. So, you can see 6 needles completely flat, then 10 needles slowly, 8 needles little more after a little more knitting happens, so that this shape is angle is shifted, and again then 6 needles in a wider gap. Now, when you look at the courses we are going to knit, here we have 0 course knitting because we are doing it in the same course. After achieving this much level, we are not knitting anymore, we are only binding it off. Now, once that is achieved, this much is over. Now, here let us say we are doing it in 10 courses. That means every second course I have to remove 2 needles, and that is what we are going to achieve here, 10 courses. Now, we have to achieve this shape probably in the complete. So, let us say half of it, that is 150, 75, and here it is 75, that is what we need to achieve. 0 here, 10 courses we have achieved this much. Let us say next 30 courses we are going to achieve this. So, 40, now around 40 courses. So, that means here we will make it as 20 courses. So, 40, 60, 70 and 0 here. So, 45 or 46 courses, in 46 course we will have it here, 20 courses we will have it here, and whatever is left around 74 courses we will have straight knitting. So, this is how we are going to divide it for a smoother curve. So, we would have, after netting all the loops here, we would have closed all these things. So, that is completely done, this shape is done. Now, every 2 course we are going to net 2 courses and 2 are going to be finished here, 2 needles. So, this way we will repeat it 5 times, we achieved this. After that we have 6 needles to be taken in, that means we need to do, sorry, here we are here now, we have to remove 8 needles in 20 courses, that means we need to do 4 times 2 needles. 4 times 2 needles, so the gap here is 20. So, every 5th course we will be doing fashioning here. So, let me do just show the calculation here. Here it is like this area 2 every 2 course 2 needles. Now, here it will be every 5 course 2 needles. We had, so here we have 2 courses, every 2 courses 2 needles to be removed, and we have to do it 5 times to achieve this calculation. So, 5 times 2 needles are going to be removed, 10 needles would be removed, and this will be happening after every 2 courses. That means in 10 courses we will have this achieved. Now, after that we have to remove 8 needles in 20 courses. So, every 5 courses 2 needles we are going to remove, 4 times we are going to do that. So, 4 into 2 you will get 8 needles, 4 into 5 you will get 20 courses. So, that is how we are going to calculate it. Now, the same way here, every 15th course we are going to remove 2 needles, and we will be doing that 3 times. So, we will have 45 courses removed, and that is 3 by 15, and 2 into 3 you will have 6 needles removed. So, basically this will look like straight line, then very frequent steps here, then very less frequent steps, then very less frequent shaping. So, basically you will get a smooth curve like that. That is what we are going to achieve it. So, we have 15, every 15th course we need to remove 2 needles, and 3 times we need to do it. After that we have to continue straight knitting 75 courses. Now, this is the way to achieve the shaping. So, such kind of calculation has to be done for every part of knitting. Usually in the paper pattern when we make it like that, the same thing would be written everywhere. So, if you are doing by hand machine, a net plan would be prepared like this and given to the operator, and the operator will follow the instructions, and he know like this many courses to be knitted, then shaping or a moving of loops should happen this many times. So, he will do that accordingly. If any mistake happens, that panel go waste. So, it is a very crucial thing to do. If it is computerized knitting, program has to be knitted, created, keeping all these calculations. Once that is tested, take out the panel, wash it, cross check it, everything is fine, then the machine can keep on producing it 100,000 whatever numbers you want. But then if it is a hand driven machine, every time we need to make sure the panel is right, because it's human going to operate the machine. He is going to follow the calculation. Sometime he wouldn't have knitted 400 courses, sometime he would have added, instead of 4 times he would have done 5 times or 6 times. All these things are going to affect the exact shape and the measurement of the final panel. So, the moment you get into shaping industry always goes for computerized or automated machines, so the knitting cost automatically increases. So I have explained how the shaping is done. Now shoulder shaping also can be done in a similar way, but since it is a very steep shaping, instead of shaping these days there is a different method adopted which is called partial knitting. I will be explaining that in unit 4 in a later stage. So you will understand how partial knitting is done to achieve very steep shaping, and the neck area also explained along with that, because we need to knit two parts simultaneously if you want to achieve a shape like this. This part and this part should be knitted separately. So again these things would be explained in partial knitting. Now we clearly understood how shaping is done. Now the question is, why do we need to do this? Is it going to increase the aesthetic element? Because shaping meaning we are going to spend more money, it takes more time. So why do we need to spend, instead of buying something for 999, why do we need to spend either 1599 or 1999, and then there is another one 2999, because this can be a seamless garment. This would be fully shaped garment. This would be semi shaped, that is because we are going to do only armhole, and the shoulder and neck would be cut. Now here there will be cut and sew garment, that is because we have cutting happening armhole, cutting happening in shoulder, cutting happening in neck. For this method we just need to knit straight panel, rectangle panel, based on the whatever measurement we want, the maximum measurement. Usually that will be the chest measurement. Based on that measurement we are going to make a panel, and later on we will be cutting whatever is not required. So that's the reason we have that garment can be produced with the cheapest price. But when we get into semi shaping, armhole would be shaped. For that we need to spend more money on knitting, so because of that it will be more expensive. Fully fashioning required shoulders and neck as well, that required more time. So again this garment would be little more expensive. And when we have no shaping, it's only seamless, it is no panel knitting, you give the yarn, the machine will give you a ready to wear garment, and that is the meaning of seamless. That is the most expensive method. I will explain this separately. Let's come back to the same question. We all know if there is no seam, that is anyway going to be a very expensive garment, and we will not have any stitch lines anywhere. So that looks completely different from these garments. Now here we still have stitching, but then why do we need to spend 1000 rupees, almost double the money between this and this? What is that going to drive any customer to purchase something like this? As I told you, externally it may look exactly the same. So let's look at what happens when you cut it. When you cut it, that area that edge have to be sealed, and one of the popular method used for sealing is overlock. Now just to explain briefly what is overlock. Overlock is used if you want to finish any edges, or if you want to join two edges together. So overlock will have a covering stitch and also a chain stitch, that is a 3-thread overlock will be like that. So this stitching is done with a high twist thread, and that is not the yarn used for knitting. For knitting, especially in flat knitting, we use very soft yarn. So that means a twist per inch. When we twist any straight filaments would be twisted together to create yarn. So the twist per inch would be 10 to 12 twist per inch. So this will be very soft yarn. Whereas for this thread we will be using 70 to 100 twist per inch. So this will be a very hard, when you try to touch it and feel it, it will be having a very rough and very hard texture into it. So we have a yarn which is very soft being used for knitting, and the hand feel of the material here would be very soft. The look of that yarn would be also in a particular texture because of the number of twists involved here, and that is been, and a material would be the wool, cotton, something like that, that has been stitched together with a high twist yarn, and it will not be the same material, and the only way we can try to match is like with the color matching technique. Now you will not get 100% matching, plus it will be high twist, a foreign material used for this, and the when we finish that, the edges would be very bulky and it can irritate the skin also because of the rough material used and the bulkiness it is going to create because of the overlock. So overlock in flat knitted garments are not really good. Number one, it irritates skin, it leaves thick, secondly it leaves very thick seams. Thirdly, the finishing, because we have big loops, the finishing will be an issue. You will not have nice, neat, clean joints here because we are going to cut it and we are going to stitch it. So the mitring will not happen properly. Now even if mitring happens, the loops will not nicely gel properly. So when you shape it, that problems are resolved. So we will have a method, if everything is shaped, we will have a method called linking to join the panels together. So linking is another method. Instead of overlock or flat lock, we can use linking method. Linking is basically a chain stitch machine with, but then what linking is going to do is like it will attach individual loops to the next panel's individual loops. So it will be attaching loop to loop. So that way, and linking would be using the same yarn used for knitting as well. So that means we have the same yarn used, color wise it is 100% matched, and texture wise is also 100% matched, material wise also it is 100% matched. So it will be a softer seam and less bulky seam because it can match loop to loop. So if it is a linked seam, it will look nice, it will feel nice, but it is expensive because it has to be connected from loop to loop. Now that is the reason we have to pay more. It is for comfort, it is for a better finish, but when you look at the finish, it will not be that evident. So for a normal customer who may not be knowing too much about the technical details, all the three garments may look the same. So is there any way we can tell the customer like this one is done in a particular method? Yes, it is possible. So what industry has done is they came out with a mark. So this is the armhole area. So if you have noticed some of your flat knitted garments, you will see few dots with the same material but some kind of lump in few areas. Now those are called fully fashion marks. So these are called fully fashioned mark. That's because shaping in this industry is called as fashioning. So if you see this lamps around any seam, it could be around neck also, it could be around shoulder also. If you see that, then you can clearly say those are fully fashioned or fully shaped garments. Now these marks are created to show it is shaped here. Now I will be explaining how these marks are created. We have seen we have loops, we have to remove this, take this and stretch it and put it here so that we can remove two needles from here. That way if we do it, and the moment we put these loops on top of the other, it will create little extra area there because there are two loops in one needle. So that will create that lump which you have seen in fully fashioned garments. And what happens, those lumps would be very close to the border, and when we link it, we will be linking it little inside. So the linking happens here, and this marks would be inside the seam. So if you see the garment, so if you see the garments, you will not see this here. Instead, these marks would have gone inside the seam because around quarter inch would be used while linking inside. So this area will go inside and you will not see any marks here. So if you want to see any marks outside, so at least we need to produce this mark around 5 needles inside. So if 2 loops or 2 veils, if we taken it for inside linking, 1 2 there will be a little gap and then you will see the marks somewhere here. So the we cannot really shift all the 5. What we need is the shifting, overlapping should happen inside. So that is what we want to achieve if you want to achieve the marks this way. So for that purpose, what we will be doing is, we are going to remove these 2 loops. That means we are going to remove these 2 needles and shift these loops inside. Now if we do the normal way, we do is like take out this and put it here. We will not have the marks happening inside. What we need is, we want the mark to be happening somewhere in the 5th and 6th loop. So what we are going to do is, we have to remove these 2 needles. So we will take out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All the 5 loops we will be taking out. We will be moving it 2 pitch inside and put it back. What I said is, we are removing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All the 5 we are going to take out. We will be moving only 2 pitch inside and put it back. So this would be shifted here. So that means there is a overlap happens here. This would be shifted here. There will be again overlap here. Now this would be shifted to this needle, this would be shifted to this needle, this would be shifted to this needle. So here there will not be overlap, but these 2 will be having overlap. The same time these 2 needles become empty as well. So this is what we are going to do. So through this method we have removed 2 needles only, but then we got the overlap or the lump or the fully fashioned mark well inside, so that once the panel is finished, we will have these overlaps well inside. So even if linking happens here, this would be seen outside, and that is how fully fashioned marks are created for the purpose of showing it as it's a value addition technique, so that the customer can understand it is there is a high technology gone into it, or more time has gone into it, or this will give more comfort, this will give a design statement, and the customer would be ready to pay more for this. We have seen how fully fashioned garments are made. Now we have cut and sew method, semi fashion method, fully fashioned method, and also I explained there is one more type which is seamless. I'll explain seamless little later. Before that, let's compare these three. Now on what basis as a designer or as a brand will decide whether that particular garment should be out of cut and sew method, semi fashion method, or fully fashion method. One, of course, if the design demand or if the brand image is such that if it is an expensive brand, certainly that would be a fully fashioned garment. Beyond this, is there any other criteria we can apply into it? Yes, we can. Now, as I explained to you, knitting fully fashioned garment will take more time compared to the semi fashion, and semi fashion will take more time compared to the this cut and sew method. So, if we do a fully fashioned garment, we are going to lose money in knitting part. But what if we are using very expensive material where each gram saved is going to contribute few rupees, then it makes lot of sense to go for fully fashioned garment. For example, if we have a cut and sew method, almost 20 to 30% goes as wastage. Now, if we have, let's say, acrylic yarn, which is probably 300 rupees a kg, and we are knitting, say, 1 kg sweater. I am saying it 1 kg to simplify it, it could be 300 or 400 grams only in actual. Just giving an example, 1 kg sweater, 30% meaning 300 grams. 300 grams of 300 rupees is almost 90 rupees. So, we are losing 90 rupees as wastage, but probably we would have saved little more than that while knitting. So, it is okay to waste this much and continue with cut and sew method, because we would have saved money in knitting. Let us imagine we are using a wool material which is 3000 rupees a kg. Now 3000 rupees a kg, 30% of wastage is almost 900 rupees, and knitting would be a fraction of extra knitting charges for fully fashioned garment would be only a fraction of that. So certainly with such expensive yarn you can never afford to do a cut and sew method, because the wastage of material is much higher here. So this could be one of the criteria you can apply on deciding whether to have cut and sew method or fully fashioned method or semi fashioned method. Now fully fashioned method also offer you the possibility of zero wastage, because all the panels are fully shaped and there is nothing to cut and throw it. Now we were continuing with the topic of seamless garments. Now what is seamless garment? Before getting into seamless garment, I would like to ask one question. Is it possible to make a tubular fabric in a flatbed knitting machine? Now you all know flatbed knitting machine would be having two flats knitting bed arranged in an inverted V shape, and knitting happens this way. The fabric would be a flat fabric would be coming out of it. Compared to this, in a circular knitting machine, we have a cylindrical needle bed which will have needles around that cylinder. This will produce a tubular fabric from this machine. So my question is it possible to make a tubular fabric here as well without stitching? While knitting itself, we should be able to do the tubular fabric. The answer is yes. The method is you start knitting on front bed first while going to one direction. While coming back, you knit on back bed. Again, when you go back, knit on front bed, front, back. You are going to get a tubular fabric. One of the question you have in your mind would be, you have loops very closed here and there are another set of loops in the back bed. What about this gap? If you look at the machine, you will realize this gap and between this hardly any gap. In fact, this gap is here, this gap is equivalent to this gap only. So when you take out this tube structure out of the flat knitted machine, you will not be able to find this area at all, because the gap is similar to the rest of the gaps between two loops. Now this way we can create tubular fabric. The same method also can be used to produce the fabric with a double of the bed width. What I mean to say is, let's say we have a needle bed of 40 inches. Let's say we got an order of fabric to be produced on 80-inch machine. Is there any way we can do that same fabric here? It's possible, but all we need to do is knit on front bed, second course knit on back bed, continue knit on back bed, then front bed. So what we are doing is knit back, front, back, front, again back, front, back. So we'll be continuously knitting like this. Later on this can be opened up into a straight piece. So this way we can double the width as well. Now I'll explain using this tubular technique how we can produce a seamless garment. So it is established that we can create tubular structures, tubular fabrics in a flatbed knitting machine. Imagine if you can start 3 tubes independent of each other. We'll create these tubes separately. Then using the move technique, we can move all the loops into either side. Using that technique, we are going to shift this tube, bend this tube towards the center. This will join here and we continue knitting. Now at this point this has become a single tube here. At this point this has become a big tube because these two tubes merged into the center and it has become a single tube. And then continue narrowing this one till you reach a neckline and finish that neckline. Now this looks like a seamless garment. Well, this is a simplified version of a seamless garment. The real method of making it is far more complex, but just to make you understand the concept of a seamless garment, I am explaining it. So starting with 3 tubes, one will act as one sleeve, another will act as the right side sleeve, the center will act as the body. You continue these tubes independently and simultaneously. Once you reach the armhole area, you shift or start bending the tube, the external two extreme end tubes towards the center. So that creates the armhole area as well as the shoulder. continue narrowing the tube till you reach a neck width, and then continue with the neck and finish that. So once this one is knitted and once it comes out of the machine, you can wear it directly. So seamless knitting machines have revolutionized the way we produce knitted garments. It has also reduced the required manpower for any particular garment making. So this is a good example for seamless garments, and you can see it's a very lightweight sweater being created with cashmere wool. And one of the first thing you would be noticing is the pattern here. This is not a jacquard, it is a indarsia pattern. As we have learned earlier, such kind of expensive material, if you are using for knitting, we cannot have any jacquard where there will be a lot of wastage. If you see this orange color here, also it is as good as single jersey, very thin orange color. That's a good example for indarsia. And this is a seamless garment. You don't have any seams at the side, you do not have a seam at the armhole, you don't have seam here at the underside of the sleeve. So it's a very good example for a seamless garment. Have a look at this hypothetical scenario. Let's imagine 4 sweaters with the same design, size, material, and branding with 4 different price tags. The first one with a price of 999, second one with a price tag of 1599, the third one with a price tag of 1999, and the fourth one with a price tag of 2999. Naturally, we will doubt that there is an error in the tagging. But what if it is not an error and it is the real price? Then what could be the reason for these 4 sweaters to be priced differently? You begin by reversing the garments inside out and then spread it on a table and examine it. You now begins to notice that there is a difference in the way seams are formed. The first one has a panel knitted with the exact width plus seam allowance as we discussed earlier. You will notice overlock in armhole, shoulder as well as on the neck. We can call the way the garment is made as cut and sew method. Cut and sew method create thick overlock seams that are pricky to the skin. This method will also create cluttered finish on the seams as when it is overlocked. It is not possible to match loops to loop from 2 different panels. So the garment finished and cut and sew method will have the least finish and comfort, and this results in it being the cheapest of all. Let's look at the second sweater. You notice that at the armhole there is no overlocking. On closer inspection, you will notice that there is a chain stitch with the same yarn used for knitting. The seams look cleaner and much softer. What you see is actually a linked seam, but when you reach the shoulder and neck, it is still overlocked as those areas are cut to make the shape. The panel is shaped at armhole as per the technical pattern, and since it is not cut, overlock stitch was not required. Hence the linked seam at the armhole. How is the shaping done at the armhole? Let's plot the technical pattern and see how many courses and veils required to create the area from bottom of the pattern till armpit. Above armpit, the width is getting reduced to shape the armhole. This shaping is achieved during knitting by moving loops from both ends of panel towards the center of the panel knitted. Once the needles from both ends are freed of loops, then they can be switched off from knitting. This enables you to get the required armhole shape while knitting as shown in the diagram. Now cut the shoulder slope, cut the neckline and then attach all the panels together to make the garment. Since the shaping is done only at armhole, this is known as semi-fashioned garment or more popularly semi-fashioned garment. Is it possible to understand whether the garment is cut and sew or semi-fashioned without looking at the inside seam? Yes, it is possible. Look carefully at the armhole area of the garment and observe the veil is deflecting parallel to the seam. There are also some thick marks formed at the same area. These marks are known as fully fashioned marks and it is created when the loop moved and overlapped with an existing loop inside the knitting area. The double loop on one needle create the thick fashion marks. The fashion marks helps a customer to differentiate between cut and sew and more expensive and well finished semi-fashioned garments. To achieve fashioning, the machine operator has to stop the knitting. Then using a transfer tool, the operator has to move a set of loops from the edge of the panels towards the inside part of knitting area. This is time consuming and the linking process to assemble panels together to make a garment is also slow and increase the labor cost. This explains the cost difference between a cut and sew garment and a semi-fashioned garment. Now let's look at the third garment closely. You see fashion marks at the armhole, sleeve, shoulder and neck. That means this particular panel is fully shaped or better known as fully fashioned. Such fully fashioned panels can be assembled without cutting, hence required no overlock seam. This also reduces the wastage of raw material to virtually zero. Since the shaping area is much more than semi-fashion garment and linked seams are also more, the production cost of this garment would be more than that of semi-fashion garment. Now, when analyzing the fourth garment, to your surprise, you may not be able to identify any seams at all. The garment is a seamless one and is usually done with more expensive, fully computerized seamless knitting machines. Though seamless knitting is a complex process, it can be explained in simple way. The knitting starts as three different tubes as shown in the diagram. The one in the middle is the body and the two smaller ones on each side are the sleeves. As the loops of sleeve tubes move towards the center front of the garment, the tubes grow vertically and then merge into one at the armhole area. Continue knitting as a single tube till the shoulder height and then narrow to the neck measurement and then stop knitting. Your seamless garment is ready. Since the machine required for seamless knitting is far more expensive than the machines that are capable of knitting fully fashioned panels, the knitting cost for a seamless garment will be much more than that of a fully fashioned one. It will be interesting to know, since these machines can eliminate the requirement for cutting and sewing, about 20 seamless machines with a couple of operators can replace an entire factory with a workforce of 200. You have come to the end of this unit. To summarize, in this unit, you have learnt about the unique ability of a flat knitting machine to knit ready to assemble panels. You have also reviewed the advantages of such a technique. Thank you.